He did not wake up that morning expecting a test of faith. It was supposed to be a quiet walk, just a man, his dog, and a harbor learning how to breathe again. But the dog slowed. The air smelled wrong. And a stranger stood where no one ever stood that early. Jonah had promised himself he was done with moments like this. Done with danger, done with choosing who might live and who might not.
What is it, boy?
Yet in that silence, before the sirens, before the fear, before the countdown, God placed a choice in front of him.
Stop right there.
Walk away
Get off me.
and keep his
Don't make me
peace.
do this.
Or stay
Get off me.
and protect people
It's
he
over.
would never meet. Because sometimes the miracle is not what God stops. It is who he asks to stand. And this morning, Jonah did not turn away. Morning settled over Port Camden with a restrained stillness, the kind that belonged to working cities before they remembered themselves. A low ceiling of clouds pressed against the harbor skyline, turning the early light pale and flat. The air was cold but not biting, damp with salt and engine oil, carrying the quiet creaks of dockwood cooling overnight. The water lay calm, broken only by slow ripples against concrete. It was not a beautiful morning. It was a familiar one. Jonah Mercer walked along the harbor path at an unhurried pace, hands relaxed at his sides, posture easy without ever becoming careless. At 45, he carried himself with the economy of someone who had learned not to waste movement. His hair was cut short, dark brown threaded with gray, his face weathered but composed. There was nothing sharp about his expression, nothing inviting either. He wore a faded gray jacket, dark shirt, worn jeans, and boots that had molded themselves to his feet over years of use. On his wrist sat an old watch with a cracked face, its hands permanently frozen. Jonah never checked it. He didn't need to. A few steps ahead moved Bishop, an aging German shepherd with a broad chest and a deep sable coat that darkened along his spine. At 8 years old, Bishop had slowed just enough to look thoughtful rather than tired. His movements were deliberate, controlled. His head carried level as his ears adjusted constantly to the environment. His eyes, amber, observant, steady, missed very little. He wore a plain collar, no markings, no sign of what he once was. To most people, he looked like a well-trained dog. To Jonah, he was habit, memory, and trust given shape. They walked this route every morning. The same stretch of harbor, the same cracked pavement, the same steel railings cold beneath the fog. Jonah liked the repetition. It gave the day a shape before anything else could interfere. Bishop seemed to understand the rhythm as well, setting the pace without ever pulling ahead too far. They passed only a few people this early. A dock worker heading toward the storage sheds, shoulders hunched against the cold. A woman crossing the street toward the inland blocks. Sarah Caldwell nodded briefly as she passed them, keys in hand, coat pulled tight. She ran a small cafe nearby, spoke kindly to everyone, and rarely asked questions. Jonah returned the nod without slowing. Bishop flicked his tail once, acknowledging her presence, then looked forward again. The interaction passed as it always did. Quiet, polite, forgettable. As they moved farther along the harbor, the city thinned behind them. Sounds softened. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a sharper metallic edge beneath the salt. Jonah noticed it without reacting. He had learned long ago that not every unfamiliar detail required interpretation. Bishop noticed anyway. His pace shortened almost imperceptibly. One step less fluid than the last. His head lifted a fraction higher, ears rotating forward and then outward. Jonah felt the change before he fully registered it. The rhythm between them broke, just enough to matter. They stopped. Jonah didn't speak. He didn't reach for Bishop either. He simply followed the dog's line of sight toward a curved section of the pier that branched away from the main walkway. It was a quiet area, rarely used at this hour. Fog clung more thickly there, dulling the edges of stacked crates and a small utility structure. Nothing moved. Nothing called attention to itself. Bishop stood still, weight balanced evenly, tail low but steady. This wasn't alarm. It wasn't fear. It was attention. Jonah inhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly different here, heated metal, something electrical perhaps, but so weak it could have been imagined. He told himself that, and believed it only halfway. "All right," he murmured, barely above the sound of the water. They waited. Time passed without urgency. A gull cried somewhere behind them. A truck engine turned over in the distance. The world continued, uninterested in whatever had drawn Bishop's focus. Jonah let his awareness expand rather than narrow. Distances, lines of sight, places people could appear from, places they could leave. It wasn't a decision, it was reflex. A figure appeared briefly near the edge of the pier, partially obscured by fog. A man, average build, dark clothing, shoulders tight. Jonah caught only the shape before the man stepped back out of view. It meant nothing on its own. People moved through the harbor every day. Bishop did not move. Jonah placed his hand lightly against the dog's shoulder, not as a command, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement. Bishop accepted the touch without reaction, eyes still fixed ahead. "Easy," Jonah said quietly. After a long moment, Bishop shifted his weight forward, took one careful step, then paused again. He glanced back briefly, checking Jonah's position, then returned his attention to the pier. Jonah felt something settle in his chest, not fear, not urgency, but the quiet recognition that something here deserved to be remembered. He chose not to approach. He also chose not to turn away. Instead, Jonah adjusted their path slightly, keeping distance without retreating, maintaining a clear view of the area without drawing attention. Bishop mirrored the decision naturally, resuming movement with measured caution. The fog began to thin as they walked on. The sun pressed harder against the cloud cover, light sharpening just enough to cast faint reflections across the water. The harbor looked the same as it always had. Ordinary. Unremarkable. But Jonah knew better than to confuse silence with safety. They continued their walk, the moment passing without explanation. No sound followed them. No one called out. Whatever had shifted in the morning remained unspoken, unresolved. As they reached the end of the path and turned back toward the city, Jonah glanced once more toward the quiet curve of the pier. Nothing had changed. And yet he carried the certainty that the day had already taken its first step away from routine. Morning moved on, unaware it had been noticed. The harbor did not announce its change. It rarely did. The fog continued to lift in thin, reluctant layers, revealing more concrete than water now, more structure than softness. The wind shifted slightly, cutting across the open stretch of the pier instead of rolling in from the city. Jonah noticed the shift the way he noticed everything these days, not with urgency, but with attention. Then the smell reached him. It was faint, almost polite, riding low beneath the salt and damp wood. Heated metal, not smoke, not fuel. Something narrower, sharper, the kind of scent that didn't belong outdoors and never lingered by accident. Jonah slowed his breathing without thinking, drawing the air in carefully, testing it. The smell faded, then returned, uneven, as if carried in pockets by the wind. Bishop felt it before Jonah decided what it meant. His head angled into the breeze, nostrils flaring once. His ears adjusted, not toward sound, but toward absence. He did not stop walking, but his pace shortened just enough to signal attention rather than alarm. They moved closer to the outer curve of the pier, still not committing to it, just close enough for details to sharpen. Jonah's eyes shifted automatically, not scanning, but sorting. What belonged, what didn't. That was when he saw the backpack. It sat near the base of a steel support post, not abandoned, not hidden, simply placed. Dark fabric, worn but intact. One strap lay twisted beneath it, the other draped carelessly against the concrete. It was too close to the edge to be forgotten casually, too far from any workstation to be practical. It did not match the quiet order of the harbor. It disrupted it. Jonah did not stare. He let his eyes pass over it once, registering position, orientation, context. The zipper was not fully closed, just enough space to suggest interruption rather than neglect. A sliver of red insulation showed briefly before disappearing back into shadow as the fabric shifted in the breeze. Bishop slowed further now, body aligning subtly between Jonah and the bag, not blocking, positioning. His tail remained low, steady. His posture was alert but contained, the way it always was when he was deciding rather than reacting. Jonah felt the first real shift inside himself then. Not fear, recognition. The smell of metal returned, clearer now. It wasn't coming from the water. It wasn't coming from the city. It was localized, contained, recent. Jonah had smelled it before in places where people had tried to build something quickly and quietly. A man stood several yards away, near the inner railing of the pier, partially turned toward the water. He was unremarkable at a distance, average height, average build, dark jacket pulled tight against the cold. Nothing about him drew attention until Jonah watched how he stood. His weight shifted too often, his shoulders were tight, raised slightly, as if bracing against impact rather than wind. His hands opened and closed at his sides, fingers flexing without purpose. The man did not look at the backpack directly. He looked everywhere else. Bishop noticed him too. Jonah could tell by the way the dog's ears adjusted, one tracking the man, the other still tuned to the environment. Bishop's attention split cleanly, precisely. This was assessment, not suspicion. Jonah did not approach either of them. Distance, he knew, was information. He adjusted their path slightly, just enough to maintain a clear line of sight without closing space. His movements remained ordinary. A man walking his dog, nothing more. The man glanced toward them, then away. The look lasted less than a second, but Jonah caught the tension in his jaw, the way his breath stuttered before settling again. That reaction did not belong to a stranger sharing a quiet pier. It belonged to someone counting variables. Something feels wrong, Jonah thought, not as a question, not even as a warning, as a conclusion quietly forming. His body responded before his thoughts organized themselves. Awareness sharpened, peripheral vision widened, sounds separated themselves into layers, the water, the wind, distant footsteps from inland. The old internal map began to assemble on its own, lines drawn between people, objects, exits. Jonah crouched briefly, pretending to retie a bootlace that didn't need fixing. From the lower angle, he noticed a faint dark mark on the concrete near the backpack, irregular in shape, as if something warm had rested there recently. Not long enough to stain deeply. Long enough to leave memory behind. He stood again slowly. Bishop did not move. His eyes remained forward, but his muscles were coiled now, not tight, just ready. Jonah placed 2 fingers lightly against the dog's collar, grounding without commanding. Bishop accepted the contact without shifting position. The man took a step back, then stopped. He exhaled sharply, then steadied himself. Jonah could see it clearly now. Not panic, not yet, but pressure. The kind that built when timing mattered and circumstances refused to cooperate. Jonah did not assign labels. He didn't need to. He had learned long ago that certainty arrived later, if at all. What mattered now was that the morning no longer followed its expected shape. The harbor began to wake behind them. A distant engine turned over. Voices carried faintly from inland streets. Time was moving forward, whether this moment was ready or not. Jonah remained where he was. He did not approach the bag. He did not confront the man. He chose observation, because observation still allowed the morning to reveal itself. Bishop held position, steady and silent. The feeling did not pass. Jonah stayed where he was, long enough for the moment to press against him. The harbor did not rush him. The water continued its slow movement against concrete, indifferent to human hesitation. Somewhere inland, a door opened, then closed. Life advanced in small, ordinary increments. This was the part he had sworn to avoid. He remembered the promise clearly, not as words spoken aloud, but as a decision made in silence. It had come after the last time his hand shook for reasons unrelated to cold. After the last night, he woke up already standing. After he realized that survival, if it came at the cost of never truly leaving, was not survival at all. He had told himself he was done with moments that narrowed the world down to seconds and consequences. Done with calculating risk while knowing that calculation itself could get someone killed. No more choosing between bad and worse. No more deciding who carried the weight afterward. He had built his mornings around that promise. Quiet walks, predictable routes, a life small enough to hold without spilling. The harbor, the dog, the early light. These were not accidents. They were boundaries. Jonah looked again at the backpack, then away from it. He did not need to examine it further. He already knew what his body was telling him. The familiarity of that knowledge was the problem. It slid too easily into place, like a tool returning to a well-worn grip. He shifted his weight slightly, considering the simplest option. Turn away. Continue the walk. Call it coincidence. Someone else would notice. Someone whose job it still was. That was the logic he had rehearsed for years, the one that allowed him to sleep. Bishop stood beside him, steady, quiet. The dog had not moved since the last adjustment of position, his attention fixed forward, his body composed. Jonah felt the presence at his side as a constant pressure, not demanding, just there. The promise surfaced again, sharper now. He had meant it. He still did. Jonah exhaled slowly and began to turn, just enough to signal withdrawal without drawing attention. He took one step back, casual, unremarkable. Bishop did not follow. Instead, the dog advanced half a step. It was a small movement. Anyone watching would have missed it. A shift of weight, a realignment of intent. Bishop did not growl. He did not stiffen. He simply placed himself forward, closer to the direction Jonah had chosen not to face. Jonah stopped. The meaning of the gesture landed immediately, without argument. Bishop was not reacting. He was indicating. This was not a command. It was not disobedience. It was information. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. Not in frustration, in acknowledgement. The promise had been about himself. It had never been about other people. He opened his eyes again, the harbor sharper now, edges more defined. He noticed the distance between the backpack and the main walkway. The way the man farther down the pier kept glancing toward open space rather than exits. The way foot traffic from inland would increase within minutes. These were not new observations. They were conclusions he had refused to draw until now. Bishop remained forward, his body language calm but resolved. He was not pulling Jonah into danger. He was pointing out that danger already existed, regardless of Jonah's participation. Jonah felt the internal resistance weaken, not because he wanted it to, but because it no longer held. He had learned long ago that avoidance did not erase consequence. It only reassigned it. He rested a hand briefly against Bishop's shoulder, grounding himself in the physical certainty of the moment, the warmth of fur, the controlled tension beneath it. Bishop did not look back. He did not need reassurance. Jonah straightened. The promise was still there. He did not break it lightly. He understood now that keeping it meant something different than he had imagined. It did not mean walking away from every situation that carried risk. It meant choosing carefully which risks he accepted and why. He could leave and preserve the version of himself he had worked to become. Or he could stay and accept that some parts of him had never stopped being useful. Neither option was clean. Jonah took a slow breath and let it out through his nose. The old clarity returned, not as adrenaline, but as focus. He did not move toward the backpack. He did not confront anyone. He simply stopped pretending that disengagement was neutral. The harbor seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Bishop held his position 1/2 step ahead, waiting, not urging, not retreating. Jonah understood then that the choice had already been made, not by impulse, not by fear, but by the quiet recognition that leaving now would not absolve him of outcome. It would only ensure he never knew which part of the morning he could have changed. He stayed. Jonah did not need to move closer to understand what he was seeing. Distance did not erase detail. It refined it. From where he stood, the backpack revealed itself not through what it showed, but through what it failed to hide. Nothing about it was random. Nothing about its placement was careless. He let his gaze rest on it only briefly, then shifted his attention elsewhere, allowing the image to assemble in his mind instead. The bag sat too cleanly against the concrete, its base aligned almost unconsciously with the steel support post. It was positioned to be stable, not convenient. The zipper gap was narrow, deliberate, just enough to allow access without exposing contents to casual view. This was not something dropped in a hurry. It was something left unfinished by design. The smell of heated metal confirmed it. Not strong, not fresh, but persistent. Battery discharge carried on the air in uneven pulses, as if whatever lay inside the bag had been powered recently, then paused. Jonah recognized the pattern. He had smelled it in safe houses, in abandoned rooms, in places meant to be empty until they weren't. He cataloged the components he could infer without seeing them. A power source compact enough to transport unnoticed, wiring insulated but not concealed, a triggering mechanism likely separated from the main charge. Not sophisticated, not crude either, functional, built by someone who knew enough to be dangerous but not enough to be confident. Improvised. Jonah felt no satisfaction in the clarity of the realization. Only wait. This wasn't meant for now. That much was obvious. The pier was too quiet, the foot traffic too thin. The device was waiting for the harbor to wake fully, for workers to return in numbers, for the rhythm of the day to carry people past this exact point without pause or suspicion. Time in this plan was the multiplier. Jonah glanced toward the inland streets. The city would begin its morning surge soon. Deliveries, dock crews, tourists who like to arrive early and linger. Within an hour, this stretch of concrete would no longer be empty enough to observe safely. Bishop remained 1/2 step ahead, his posture unchanged. He did not look at the bag anymore. He didn't need to. His attention had shifted outward, tracking space and movement, monitoring the environment for changes that mattered. Bishop understood containment. He always had. Jonah felt the absence acutely then. No radio at his shoulder, no voice in his ear, no team to distribute tasks or share consequence. The quiet around him was not tactical silence. It was isolation. He had chosen this life. He did not regret it. But choice did not eliminate moments like this. It only determined how alone one would be when they arrived. Jonah considered his options without naming them. Observation bought time, but time was the one resource he did not fully control. Withdrawal preserved distance, but distance would soon be swallowed by the day's momentum. Intervention required commitment, and commitment carried risk, not only to himself. The man farther down the pier remained in Jonah's peripheral vision. He had not approached the backpack. He had not left either. His posture suggested waiting rather than action, as if he were measuring the morning against a plan that refused to align cleanly. Jonah did not need to see the man's face to understand the tension there. He had felt it before, the strain of timing slipping out of reach. Jonah crouched again, slower this time, using the movement to shield his focus. From the lower angle, the faint discoloration near the bag was more visible. Heat residue, recent but cooling. Whatever internal process had been running had paused, intentionally or otherwise. The device was not active yet. It was prepared. That distinction mattered. Jonah rose carefully, heart steady, thoughts narrowing. This was no longer a question of uncertainty. It was confirmation. He did not need wires in his hands or schematics in his mind to know what he was facing. Experience filled in the gaps efficiently, without drama. No backup, no margin for delay. And yet, nothing could be rushed. The harbor wind shifted again, lifting the edge of the bag just enough for the fabric to flex. Jonah watched without reacting. The shadows swallowed the movement quickly, restoring the illusion of stillness. The device remained patient. Time moved forward, indifferent. Jonah rested his hand briefly against Bishop's shoulder, grounding himself in the only certainty available. Bishop did not look back. His stance remained measured, forward, attentive. He was ready, but not eager. That mattered too. Jonah straightened, the finality of the moment settling into him. He had hoped briefly that the morning would resolve itself without demand. It had not. The device waited in the shadows, unfinished, unactivated, but inevitable. And Jonah understood now that the window for choice was narrowing, not because of urgency, but because of people. Because the harbor would not stay empty. Because time, once allowed to pass, could not be retrieved. He stayed where he was, and watched the seconds slip quietly by. Jonah did not move closer to the device. That choice mattered. Distance was not retreat. It was control. He adjusted his position by inches rather than steps, angling his body so that the backpack remained in view without becoming the center of attention. The harbor had begun to fill in around the edges now, not crowded yet, but no longer empty. Sound layered itself back into the morning. Footsteps echoed faintly from the inland path. A delivery truck idled somewhere beyond the warehouses. Time, once abstract, had started to press its weight forward. Bishop shifted with him, smooth and precise. The dog moved not as a reaction, but as a continuation, maintaining the half-step that kept him subtly ahead. His posture communicated nothing dramatic. He stood broad and steady, head level, ears alert but relaxed. To anyone watching casually, he looked like a large dog pausing during a morning walk. To the man farther down the pier, he was an obstacle. Jonah watched the effect register. The man had not intended to be seen this early. His plan depended on absence, on space, on a stretch of time where nothing interfered. Now there was interference. A man and a dog occupying the wrong geometry. The man's breathing shortened. He glanced toward the backpack, then away, then toward the open path that led back inland. Each glance lasted just a fraction longer than the last. Jonah read the tension without interpreting it aloud. He had learned that naming a problem too early often made it harder to manage. Instead, he let the situation speak. The man's hands flexed again, fingers curling and uncurling, a repetitive motion that betrayed effort. Not effort to act, but effort to wait. Bishop took one deliberate step forward and then stopped. The movement was quiet. It carried no threat. But it changed the space between them. The dog's presence now intersected the most direct line between the man and the open walkway. Bishop did not block completely. He narrowed options. That was enough. Jonah felt the shift ripple outward. The man's shoulders rose, tightening against his jacket. His eyes flicked down to Bishop's chest, then back up, calculating. The dog did not stare him down. Bishop looked past him instead, toward the space beyond, as if the man were already something to be managed rather than confronted. Working without words meant trusting the language they had built together. Jonah did not signal. He did not command. He simply stayed where he was, maintaining distance, maintaining normalcy. A man walking his dog. Nothing more. Nothing less. A woman appeared farther down the path, approaching from inland. She was in her late 30s, medium height, bundled in a dark coat with her hands buried in the pockets. Her hair was pulled back tightly, functional rather than styled. She walked with purpose, eyes forward, expression neutral. She glanced briefly at Jonah and Bishop, then past them, already preoccupied with her own mourning. She did not notice the tension. She was not meant to. Jonah accounted for her presence instantly. Another variable. Another reason to slow the clock. He shifted again, subtly guiding Bishop's position so the dog's broad frame remained between the woman's path and the area near the backpack. Bishop complied without hesitation, adjusting his stance to widen the buffer. The woman passed them without breaking stride. Offering a polite nod, Jonah returned with equal neutrality. When she was gone, the space felt tighter. The man's jaw clenched. His attention snapped back to Jonah now, sharper than before. Jonah met the look briefly, not challenging, not inviting, just present. Eye contact was information. Jonah gave only what was necessary. Bishop did not move. His stillness had become the loudest thing in the space. The man shifted his weight, then stopped himself, as if remembering something. He reached into his jacket pocket and then pulled his hand back out, empty. His breathing grew more visible now, fogging the air in short bursts. This was not the posture of someone in control of timing. This was someone watching his window, narrow. Jonah felt the old instinct rise, clean and familiar. Control the environment, reduce variables, buy time. He had sworn he would never do this again, never let his days be governed by calculations like these. Yet here he was, doing it anyway, because someone had to. Bishop advanced another half step. The dog's movement was unhurried, deliberate. He did not bare his teeth. He did not tense aggressively. He simply occupied more space, his presence undeniable now. To the man, the message was clear even without language. Passage was no longer free. The man's plan fractured audibly in his breath. He took a step sideways, testing the perimeter. Bishop adjusted, mirroring the movement, always just enough to remain in the way without appearing to chase it. Jonah watched carefully, making sure the exchange stayed quiet, contained. No sudden gestures, no escalation. From the corner of his eye, Jonah noticed movement near the cafe block. Sarah Caldwell had stepped out onto the sidewalk, a paper cup in hand, keys dangling from her fingers. She was tall and spare, her posture upright but softened by habit. There was an openness to her face that came from years of speaking to strangers kindly, of listening more than she talked. She paused, scanning the harbor as she often did, before opening for the day. Jonah felt a flicker of unease at her presence. She did not belong in this moment. Sarah noticed Jonah and lifted her hand slightly in greeting. Her eyes lingered on Bishop a moment longer than usual, noting his stance. She sensed something off, not danger exactly, but disruption. She hesitated, then took a step back toward her door, instinct guiding her without explanation. Jonah caught her eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. She understood without knowing why. Sarah retreated inside, the door closing softly behind her. The man saw none of this. His focus had narrowed completely now, locked on Bishop. The dog's presence had done what Jonah could not have achieved alone. It had forced attention. The plan had depended on invisibility. Now there was a witness that could not be distracted, reasoned with, or ignored. Jonah remained still. He did not capitalize on the man's tension. He let it work on its own. The longer the man hesitated, the more pressure accumulated. Plans built on precision rarely survived interruption. The man swallowed hard. His eyes darted again toward the backpack, then toward the path behind Jonah, calculating escape that no longer looked clean. Jonah noted the change in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged for just a moment under the weight of choice. Bishop held his ground. Minutes passed, though it felt shorter. The harbor continued to wake. Voices grew closer. Foot traffic increased in small increments. Each new sound tightened the space further. Jonah felt time slipping, but not away from him. Toward him. Each second bought was a second denied to whatever the plan had been. That was enough for now. The man's breathing grew uneven. He wiped his palms against his jacket, leaving faint dark streaks behind. His eyes flicked once more to Bishop, then to Jonah. The calculation had changed. Not completed. Disrupted. Jonah did not move. Bishop did not move. And in that stillness the morning bent slightly off its intended course. The mistake happened the moment the man understood he had been seen, not confronted, not challenged, recognized. That realization cracked whatever discipline he had left. His breathing went shallow, uneven, the rhythm breaking as panic rushed in where calculation had once lived. He had planned for distance. He had planned for time. Now he had neither. His hand went to the backpack too fast. Jonah saw it immediately, the lack of order in the movement, the way fingers fumbled instead of followed sequence. This was not execution. This was fear trying to regain control. The zipper shifted. Pressure was applied where it should not have been. A click cut through the harbor air. Small, clean, final. Then came the tone. It was thin, electronic, precise, neither loud nor dramatic, yet impossible to ignore. It did not belong to the morning. It did not belong to the water or the wind or the slow return of the city. It announced itself with authority, a sound that meant a system had crossed from preparation into motion. Jonah felt the world narrow around it. The device had been activated early. The man staggered back as understanding caught up with action. His eyes widened, horror replacing intent. This was not the moment he had chosen. The countdown now lived in the open, and he was still standing inside its radius. His hands lifted uselessly, hovering as if the motion itself might undo what had already begun. Bishop moved first. The dog stepped forward with sudden mass, stance widening, body firm and immovable. No bark, no lunge, just presence, just certainty. The man's instinctive retreat failed as Bishop erased the path without touching him. Panic collapsed inward, the man's balance breaking as he dropped to one knee. Jonah stepped in at the same time. "Don't move!" His voice was low, controlled, stripped of urgency. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was instruction. The man froze, caught between the sound of the device and the certainty in Jonah's tone. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him as consequence finally arrived. Jonah did not look at him again. The tone continued, steady and merciless, measuring time without concern for intent or regret. Heat radiated faintly through the fabric of the backpack now, subtle but unmistakable. The device was no longer waiting. It was working. Jonah closed the distance. He did not rush. Rushing created errors, and errors here were irreversible. Every step was measured, each movement deliberate. He crouched beside the backpack, positioning his body to shield it from view, to claim the space before anyone else could wander into it unaware. The harbor had not stopped waking. Footsteps approached from inland. Voices carried closer, casual and unguarded. The world pressed forward, ignorant of how close it stood to fracture. Jonah felt the seconds compress, not racing ahead, but folding inward, tightening the space available for choice. Behind him, Bishop held position, broad and absolute, guarding the perimeter without instruction. The dog's stillness was deliberate, his presence a wall no one crossed without consequence. Jonah's hands hovered above the backpack. This was the point of no return, not because action had begun, but because it could no longer be avoided. The promise he had made to himself flickered at the edge of thought, distant and irrelevant now. Promises did not stop countdowns. Only decisions did. The tone sharpened, its interval tightening. Time was no longer passing. It was being spent. Jonah took a breath, slow and controlled, and committed. Jonah moved when the moment allowed it, not a second before. The tone from the device continued its thin, relentless marking of time, each interval shaving away whatever illusion of control remained. He did not rush. Rushing had never saved anyone. He anchored his breathing, steadied his hands, and let the noise of the world recede until there was only sequence and effect. The backpack was warmer now, the heat contained but insistent, a sign of a system pushed beyond patience. Jonah adjusted his position to block sight lines, to claim the space fully. Bishop stayed exactly where he was, broad and immovable, a living barrier that turned curiosity into caution. People slowed at the edge of the moment, sensing something wrong without knowing what it was. Jonah felt their presence like weather at his back and shut it out. He worked with the same economy that had shaped his mornings, the same discipline that once governed far harsher hours. No narration, no dramatics, only choices made cleanly and in order. The device resisted in the way crude things did, stubborn rather than clever, but resistance was something Jonah understood. He met it without anger, without hurry, removing uncertainty piece by piece. The tone sharpened, then faltered, then sharpened again, as if the device itself were unsure which future it belonged to. Jonah stayed with it. The seconds compressed until there was no space left for thought, only attention. He made the final adjustment with care, born of repetition, then waited. He did not pull back immediately. He let silence arrive on its own terms, because silence was the only confirmation that mattered. The tone stopped, not slowly, not theatrically. It ceased as if cut from the air. Jonah held his position, counting without numbers, listening not for sound, but for its absence. The harbor exhaled around him, a collective release that had not yet realized it was safe. When nothing followed, when the ground beneath him remained steady, and the air remained intact, Jonah leaned back and let the weight hit him all at once. His breath broke free, sharp and unguarded. His hands shook now, the delayed price of control finally collected. He sat there for a moment, letting the tremor pass through him without judgment. Bishop was at his side instantly, pressing close, solid, and warm. Jonah rested his hand against the dog's shoulder and felt the world return in pieces. Behind them, the man made a broken sound, thin and hollow. The tension that had held him upright collapsed entirely. He did not try to run. He did not try to speak. He folded inward, hands over his head, as if smaller shape might absolve him of consequence. Jonah did not look at him. The moment no longer belonged to confrontation. Sirens approached fast, rising and overlapping, then cutting through the harbor with unmistakable authority. They grew louder, then closer, then slowed as vehicles arrived and doors opened. Voices followed, controlled and practiced, carrying the weight of procedure. Jonah stayed where he was, hands visible, posture neutral. He did not explain. He did not need to. Uniformed officers moved in with efficient caution, taking in the scene at a glance. They secured the man without resistance, guiding him to his feet and away from the water. The man went willingly, eyes down, shoulders slack, as if the outcome had already been accepted. An officer spoke to Jonah, brief and direct, asking what had been touched and what had not. Jonah answered with the same economy he had used moments earlier. Facts only. Sequence only. Specialists arrived and took custody of the backpack, treating it with the careful respect owed to things that nearly mattered too much. They worked in practiced silence, confirming what Jonah already knew. The threat was over. The mourning had been allowed to continue. As the crowd was pushed back and the perimeter widened, Sarah appeared at the edge of the scene, coat pulled tight, worry written plainly across her face. She did not approach. She did not call out. She caught Jonah's eye from a distance and saw enough in his posture to understand that questions would not be welcome yet. She nodded once, a small, steady gesture, then turned back toward her cafe, carrying the morning with her. An officer thanked Jonah, the words earnest but measured. Jonah nodded in return, the exchange complete. Praise slid past him without purchase. Recognition had never been the point. The absence of catastrophe was. He watched as the harbor returned to itself in increments. Traffic resumed. Voices softened. The water reclaimed its rhythm. The place where everything had nearly broken became ordinary again, indistinguishable from the rest of the concrete. That was the outcome Jonah wanted, an unremarkable continuation. When the sirens finally faded, leaving behind only the usual sounds of a working city, Jonah stood and adjusted his jacket. The watch on his wrist remained still, unchanged by the morning. He glanced down at Bishop, who looked back with calm attention, tail low, posture relaxed at last. They did not linger. Jonah led them away from the pier, choosing a path that returned them to the familiar stretch of Harbor Walk. No one followed. No one called after them. The city moved on, satisfied that the worst had been denied. As they walked, Jonah felt the quiet certainty settle into him, not relief, not pride, but something steadier. The knowledge that the morning had been allowed to remain what it was meant to be, that no one would remember this day for what almost happened. For Jonah, that was enough. Morning arrived on time. The sky over Port Camden was clear. Light moved quickly across the harbor, touching steel, water, and concrete without hesitation. The air was cool, ordinary. Jonah Mercer walked the same route at the same hour, same jacket, same boots. His watch was still broken. He did not check it. Bishop walked beside him, no longer leading. The German shepherd's stride was relaxed, ears alert but easy. Whatever vigilance had been needed was gone. They passed the pier. Nothing marked it. No barriers, no scars. The harbor had returned to itself. Sarah Caldwell stood outside her cafe, unloading crates. She looked up, met Jonah's eyes, and nodded once. Jonah nodded back. No words, no questions. Footsteps filled in around them. Voices, engines. Morning took hold. Jonah did not slow. He did not look back. Yesterday stayed where it belonged. Bishop paused briefly, sniffed the air, then moved on. The moment passed. They reached the end of the path and turned toward the city. The sun climbed higher. Windows caught the light. Life continued. Jonah walked on with Bishop at his side. The morning was waiting. They had not turned away. That was enough. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not fire from the sky or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes the miracle is restraint. Sometimes it is the quiet strength to stay when walking away would be easier. Jonah did not wake up that morning expecting to be used by God. He simply chose not to turn his back. And in that choice, lives were spared, a city remained whole, and an ordinary morning was allowed to continue. God often works this way, not through noise, but through presence, not through perfection, but through willingness. Not through those who feel ready, but through those who stay. In our daily lives, we may never face a moment as dramatic as Jonah's. But every day we are given smaller choices: to notice instead of ignore, to care instead of pass by, to stand instead of walk away. Those choices matter more than we realize. They are where faith becomes action. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on where you are being called to stay instead of leaving, where courage is being asked of you quietly, where God may be working through your presence. If you believe in this message, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to let others know they are not alone. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles. And if you believe, type Amen in the comments as a prayer that God will protect those who watch, a prayer that He will guide us when the right choice is not the easy one, a prayer that He will use our ordinary mornings for extraordinary good. May God bless you and keep you.